Welcome everybody to the INSEAD webinar on Europe's AI opportunity from sovereignty to scale. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Just before we start, a couple of rules that you all know probably. You are muted. Please use the Q&A tab to suggest any questions. We'll pick up as many as we can from there during the webinar, but also at the end we'll allow some time. And also the webinar is recorded. For any technical issues, please email digital@inside.edu. I'm Theos Evgeniou, Professor of Technology and Business at INSEAD since 2001, and always a pleasure to be with you here talking about topics that I've been working for some time around AI. And with me, we have Tim.
I'm Tim Gordon. I'm co-host of the Age of Intelligence podcast with Theos. I'm a partner and co-founder at Best Practice AI and a co-founder of the Digital Statecraft Academy. Look, we're today talking about AI and sovereignty to scale, and we're incredibly lucky to be joined by Constantijn van Oranje Nassau, who is someone whose career since he graduated from INSEAD in 2000 has very much been focused around how we build a stronger digital agenda across Europe. He's worked at the European Commission. He's a member of the Dutch National Growth Fund. He's a board member of the NATO Innovation Fund. And at the moment, perhaps most pertinently for today, he is an envoy at techleap.nl. So Constantijn hopefully is going to sign in and join us. Constantijn, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell us a bit more about what you do at Techleap? What's it about? What's the mission? What do you achieve there? What's the work that's going on?
Hi, Tim. Theos, nice meeting you guys. So Techleap is originally a government program focusing on creating a better environment for tech entrepreneurs in the Netherlands. And first, it was more focused about on structural change, like better visa requirements, better access to capital, technology, tech transfer, those kind of things. And we took it to more towards a program supporting tech entrepreneurs directly. We now have a community of some 500 tech entrepreneurs that we help scale, because one of the challenges in the Netherlands was that we had a lot of startups. We didn't have a lot of startups that scaled internationally. So that's been the focus. Since then, we've kind of evolved. We now have a government program that focuses on deep tech, which is more strategic. On one part, we have a number of verticals we're focusing on that you all recognize: future of compute, energy, clean tech, climate, and maybe and we're looking into defense. And we have a more generic program on when we're trying to get many more startups coming out of our university system and addressing the barriers to that. So those are the main challenges we're focusing on. Then we're quite agile organization. So if we see an opportunity, we will address it. So one of the exciting projects we are currently focusing on is a national AI hub in Amsterdam of some 10,000 square meters, where we're going to gather some of the most exciting AI companies all across the AI stack. So that's a next initiative we're embarking on.
Thanks a lot, Constantijn. So I've been following what Netherlands is doing, and I must say that you are one of the most advanced countries in terms of thinking about AI. Great job there, but of course there are a lot of challenges. What does success look like for you? Not only for you, for Techleap, but also for the Netherlands AI, let's say, story. And what are today's key paths to get there? The key missing elements or weak elements. You mentioned a number of them, but what do you think are the weakest elements, but also the strongest ones?
Well, I don't think we're leading in AI, actually. It's nice that you say so. I think we have a very strong position at the bottom of the AI stack with companies like ASML and ASMI Bezi. So we have a solid semicon industry, but we lack the large language models. And I think our bet would be more in industrial AI and world models, because we believe that the large language model space is very crowded and very hard to catch up, given the capital requirements. We also used to have a very strong data center sector, which has been under a lot of pressure due to energy constraints and space constraints. And so currently, I would say we would not have the infrastructure that is necessary to build a really, really strong AI ecosystem. But we do have a lot of companies, startups in the application domain. And in that sense, there's a lot of entrepreneurship around the topic.
Is the focus on the industry you mentioned something that does not require necessarily leadership or strength on the large language models that we see today? Do you see that being like a new kind of area that a country can general, or Europe in general, can kind of be strong despite not being as strong so far in the non-world models, non-industry space?
Yeah, I think so. I think what ASML did with their 1 billion plus investment in Mistral is an example. I think we should see more of that. We have a lot of industrial data that is still currently unused or underexploited, and I think that those are domains. Given that we still have a relatively strong manufacturing sector in Europe, those are areas that we can definitely do much more with. I think trying to compete now with the large language models is going to be very difficult. But of course, there's much more than language. There's other data, there are other algorithmic and there are architectures that we can pursue. We're just at the beginning of AI, so it would be really crazy to already kind of concede defeat. And there's a lot of opportunity ahead of us.
So when you mentioned your 10,000 square meter AI hub, what sort of companies are appearing in there? What sort of companies does Holland produce that looks like they're going to give you a global competitive edge?
Well, we have companies that actually developing the chips for the edge, so more edge compute instead of in the data centers. Of course, a lot of data center technologies. We have cloud companies like Nebius and Nebul that are AI native. We have a lot of course companies in the agentic space. And we also have model companies. I mean, they and frontier companies, but they would be specific to healthcare or some sector. So, and what we want to do is really identify the companies, and not just in the Netherlands. And we want to be. This is the start, and we want to keep it open for European companies to establish themselves, and even units from the large US firms if they want to be there, to really create a space where you have enough density of talent working on AI all across the stack.
And the world models you mentioned earlier, are they mostly, obviously, typically the world models most people have heard of are around automotive, but do you sense those are the ones that are largely industrial players, or where else do you see them emerging?
Well, we have an interesting one with Dutch founders based in the Netherlands, active in the US, France, Switzerland. It's called the General Intuition, which is built on gaming information data. So it will develop basically operating systems for humanoid robotics and robotics based on that information. We'll also have, I think, interesting applications in the defense domain. So that's just one. Of course, in France, we've seen Jan LeCun with his model, and I think there is a lot of appetite for doing new stuff, and there's quite a lot of capital available for that too.
And is all tech now AI, or do you still see that as being a?
Well, not all tech is AI, but all tech will be driven by AI. And if you see, for instance, science, the lead times and are drastically reduced. If you can model things instead of going in a lab, that of course reduces the time that you can and increases tremendously the amount of experiments you can do. So discovery is an area where there's going to be a lot of innovation. And so yeah, I think any company, if every company needs to consider how AI is a fundamental enabler for their business, and the same goes for science.
One question is the role of the current industries, right? You mentioned the industrial strength, manufacturing strength of Netherlands, Europe. Will this be, first of all, how do they play in this game? How do they support this? Second of all, could this be a threat to them potentially? In which case, this can be, both an opportunity but also a threat for the economy, given the heavy share of the economy from the industrial and scientific space. How do you see that? The current industry.
So it depends on which level you want to look at this. It's an opportunity, but if we don't move fast enough, it's a potential threat. And the underlying energy requirements are massive. So and we have a lot of challenges there too. We have our grids are not adapted to renewables, so we have issues in grid and in energy supply and access. we tend to forget we still had a climate crisis that we had to deal with, and we have a demographic crisis. So we have a lot of issues that were still on our plates, and now this AI is coming in and changing really the playing field. I recently was in Shenzhen, and it's quite extraordinary what you see there. You didn't talk too much about the models. Talk much more about applied AI. Or actually, don't talk too much about AI at all. It's about automation, and to see the degree of automation and efficiency and also velocity of developments there. That's definitely a challenge. I mean, that's a competitive challenge to Europe, because we don't have that kind of velocity. I think we are in Europe optimized for society, and we have incredible wealth in our social systems, in our freedom, our quality of life, and all those kind of things. We see that China is more optimized for speed, scale, industrialization, automation, and the US may be more around innovation. And we find it hard to find a space in between, or a third way that will give us that competitive edge, and in the meantime guarantees our quality of life and the way Europe views itself as a space for human rights, freedoms, and an equitable society.
You mentioned China, and of course, back to the industrial question, the automotive industry is maybe a canary in the mines, as they say, right? So how Chinese automotive industry?
But it's a very fat canary.
Very fat canary, yes, which hopefully everybody has seen, of course. And the question is whether this can repeat, or how to defend the other industries against, other kind of disruptions, let's say, from either AI and whatever the industry is, or other technological innovations. So Europe's reaction to disruptions and speed needs to be improved while managing the social aspects. How do we do this?
Well, you talked about defending. I think, of course, there's a time maybe we have to defend ourselves temporarily. But maybe we need to look back first and see, well, what we did in the past. I mean, we did quite happily cede all control over our cloud and our IT to large US firms. We did try to regulate, we did try to defend a bit. But on the whole, we optimized on top of US technology there. All our manufacturing, we allowed to basically go to China. So we've really allowed this to happen. So we need to ask ourselves, like, what is it that Europe wants, and what are we willing to give up to get back into a situation where we at least have some control over some critical capabilities. And that I don't see that conversation happening enough yet. I think when I was in China, what's quite obvious is that many of these industries are very much dependent on exports to Europe and to the US, and because the market in China is so cutthroat competitive that the margins are close to zero. So there's a lot of overproduction that has to go to US. Of course, to US and Europe, we do have leverage. I mean, we could say, we don't want that import. Of course, the Chinese have raw materials, and they have a lot of our chips and other things that we need for our car industry. Those will, of course, then they will retaliate. So what is it that we want to, what are we prepared to give up if this really comes down to a bare knuckle fight to protect our industry? And how much time do we need, or does our industry need, to adjust to this new reality, where we really need to be much more aggressive and have much more velocity than we currently have in terms of innovation and adopting new technologies?
So, Constantijn, what do you think we should be prepared to give up? I mean, you described, with a social construct in Europe that works in one way, it's not going to allow us to play the Chinese game of sort of relentless competition, the sort of flywheel of firms coming and going with brutal efficiency in Shenzhen and so on. What is it Europe needs to give up to get there? Can we still be Europe at the end of this transition?
Yeah, I think that is that's not up to me. I mean, it's up to our politicians. I do think that we lack a sense of maybe urgency. Of course, we do see that Europe has acted. I mean, it's really clear that the current European Commission has already acted in terms of reducing regulation, prioritizing innovation, investment. We just saw on the CHIPS Act, we saw the sovereignty package. So it must be said that Europe has actually responded, but that's at the EU level where things are relatively easy. Then we see that the national level companies are really countries are really focusing on their own interest, and we don't see that kind of joined up response. So if the urgency is sensed at the degree where I think it should be, then we should be much more thinking like we are thinking in terms of the defense, for the 5% defense spending. We should be looking at the kind of IT and AI infrastructure. That means big investments in that space. It also means doubling down on investments in energy and those things. So then, of course, you start seeing where maybe the friction lays and where our social welfare system might be supported. But we don't know that yet. We need to first kind of look at where we want to go, what kind of investments we need, and then start figuring out, okay, what does it take in terms of adjustments of our labor laws, etc. Because if I look at the companies we work with, they are competing with companies in the US that do famously the 966. And in China, it's more like 867. And if you have companies and employees working at that pace, then it's really hard to compete. If you are in the Netherlands and you don't feel that kind of urgency and everybody is living a really good life, but then we will be losing. And losing, I mean, if it's our choice to lose in that scale and then to make Europe like into the museum of the world, then if that's a deliberate choice, that's I guess that's fine. But if it's us just sliding or sleepwalking into that, I think that is not fine. I think we need much more active choices to invest in the things we know we need to invest in.
So looking for the go ahead, Tim.
After you, Theos.
Looking for the middle ground, or the third ground, as you said, is basically the big question now. Not the Chinese way necessarily, not the US way, but some other European way that was yet to be defined. There's a question from the audience, which goes across different kinds of stakeholders. What do we need to do as a government, as a tech community, and as citizens? I would also add as executives also in industries, I guess.
Well, I think the tech community, we need to think bigger. Many of the companies coming out of Europe will first think of their national markets, and you have to think more international. So not only at European scale, but at global scale. Our governments need to facilitate that. So there are competition policies that are currently quite restrictive. There are capital restrictions that we don't have, for instance, a common or a capital union in what they now call the Investments and Saving Union in Europe. So you still have much less liquidity than you would have in the US. So that's what governments can do. They can be the facilitators for this. But I work a lot with startup founders, and for me, the point really is the founders themselves need to also have that ambition, and it's a hard challenge. We put a lot of weight on people's shoulders that start companies that have to build from 0 to 2,000 plus people, have to really change Europe and all these kind of things and put it on the shoulders of a few entrepreneurs. But I think the appetite is there. And what we're seeing now in countries like Poland, there's a lot of energy. Of course, the UK And in London, one unicorn after the other. Paris has been super aggressive in investing in tech, and with the Netherlands, we also have a lot of activity. So I think on the whole, the opportunities are there, the entrepreneurs are there, but they need a more facilitating environment. And we see initiative like EU Inc., which tries to create Delaware Corp for Europe, but those are still very careful and half-hearted. And they get a lot of pushback. So it sometimes feels that the urgency is not felt to let go of all of the national preferences and actually support some European growth companies like we've seen in other regions.
So one thing that's been driving some urgency is things like the decision by Anthropic, thanks to the US government last Friday, to drop Fable as a tool that could be used because the US government came and said it can't be used for foreigners because of cybersecurity concerns. AI sovereignty has kind of become one of the big phrases that's been used a lot this year in terms of people thinking through the sort of the investments you're talking up and down the stack, from energy to staff to intellectual property and so on. Is AI sovereignty a real thing? I mean, do you think it's a useful framing, or is it just a simple way of saying we don't trust the Americans anymore?
No, I don't know if sovereignty is the right wording. We want to be less dependent and less vulnerable. So it's about optionality on one side. But if the optionality is just Chinese or US, and both are weaponizing AI or weaponizing access to raw materials or access to critical infrastructure, then then we have to then sovereignty might come into play. Some other people say, no, it's not about sovereignty, it's about leverage. So as long as you have leverage. But if you're a small country like the Netherlands, you can even have a company like ASML, which is crucial for all of the AI chips development. But how much leverage do you get out of that if you don't have one European front? If it just breaks down, it's just the Dutch having to face China and the US. Of course, there's not so much leverage you can get out of that, and we can say, okay, well, we'll not. We can do the same as happened with Anthropic, and say we're not going to send any machines anymore to those countries that are blocking us or whatever. But we are completely dependent. Also, ASML is dependent on clients and also suppliers in the US. So there's not much leverage you can get out of that. But I think most importantly, we have to identify what these vulnerabilities are and start to create alternatives. And one strategy is, yes, to in critical value chains to have a few choke points or where you have some leverage. But in the essence, we need to build capabilities again in critical value chains. I mean, we cannot be dependent on overseas nations for our vaccines, for instance, or our energy or raw materials that can basically stop any strategic activity in Europe just at the whim of a political decision. We were doing a lot in Ukraine with drones, for instance. But the battery packs, or at least the cells, come from China, all of them. So if China doesn't want us, I mean, it's that easy. They can basically block the access to. So in view of that, we need to first also invest in supplies. And no politician wants to invest in supplies because it feels like dead money. But we need to do that. We do it in energy, but we might need to do it in raw materials. And we might need to do it in things like batteries and other things to make sure that we have a bit of a negotiating position in a completely new geographic or geopolitical world, which is one of big blocks trying to win and not trying to cohabitate and find win-win solutions, which Europe is pretty wired towards.
So you're in the room with some of the most important people in Europe, whether through the various aspects of the roles you play. Do people get it? I mean, is this a conversation that's happening in the way you describe? You describe it in pretty scary terms, in terms of a future where Europe gets squeezed with a sort of the museum Europe, the unsustainable social model, the challenges coming through from non-democratic weaponizing players across the world. Do people in the senior rooms get this? Is this a conversation they're having? And is it a conversation they're having in the concepts of a way that would be recognizable to a startup founder and go, that's a useful conversation, as opposed to a traditional conversation that may not be so useful?
Well, it has changed. I mean, technology has become a really important political topic, which it wasn't 10 years ago. And so it has changed. But I think what I see is people at the top in Europe they're not engineers. And so very few people actually fully grasp the technology and what the challenges are and all that. Also not using it. I mean, in my country, the senior civil servants are not allowed to use ChatGPT, and we're building our own GPT-NL, which is I mean, it, quite frankly, is a joke compared to what the frontier models are building. So if you are not even able to use the tools, how can you then decide how to regulate them? And so that's one part. Two, I think people talk about these things in isolation. So if I talk to people that are working in technology, yes, they will agree on these points. Some people working in trade, they will also agree. But we don't have one more kind of holistic narrative. We don't really fully understand what the consequences are. Because we haven't had that mindset. I think if you are in the US, it's a country that's always at war. It's a country that has security everywhere. It's a country that thinks about how strategic technology is. We're not really doing that in Europe. When AI came up, we started thinking about the risks and the ethics and all the problems it may arise, and we wanted to regulate it and structure it and control it. And whereas the US was doubling down and getting ahead of the game, and then worrying about controlling it later. So if you don't win, if you don't own the space, you can't control it. And that's a different mindset. We don't do that. We're not also, our governance structures are not geared towards that kind of top-down, Europe-wide set of investment, or using, for instance, the fiscal instrument, which of course Europe even can't do. It's just not within the subsidiarity of European governance. So
has the new U.S. administration, the war in Ukraine, now the other wars happening, has that changed the dynamics? And one would hope that has changed the dynamics and the perspective. But is that enough, or is it too little, too late? What's your sense about this?
This is of course a painful topic, because you said we hope it changes dynamics. Yeah, this is the scenario we hoped we would not be in. And but now Europe is waking up to a new reality where we have a war, where we are rearming ourselves. We don't really know what that war looks like. We are already being sabotaged in many ways. So there's a kind of a shimmering, invisible conflict. And we don't have the capability to really deal with that. So we're rebuilding that, and we've done it at quite a pace. It's quite remarkable how the 5% GDP norm was agreed in most of European countries. How Europe is actually stepping up also in defense procurement, and we've seen funds being raised. Many companies that have this dual use, that switched from a civil application to now supporting also applications and services for that have a defense and security purpose. So it's actually quite remarkable how we are making that shift bottom up. But again, that's in that area. I don't think we have a vision of how all of this comes together, and what it really requires from us. And we still will happily kind of regulate in the consumer space, and think and then maybe allow industries to suffer, whereas we might need those industries to be ahead. I mean, we see this in competition policy as well. Do we allow a European champion, which means less competition in Europe, so that's a worse outcome for the consumer, but we have a competitor at the global scale? Or do we stick to our policies where we are protecting that consumer, which I also feel very strongly for, but it makes it very hard to build global competitors. And the result may be that in time that European player, all those smaller European players will just be wiped out. And then we end with a much worse scenario where we are not in control. We don't kind of generate any income from it, and we still have the consumer who is stuck with large global monopolists or oligopolists, which is again a non-desirable outcome. So time is an important factor. Maybe we have to do things now to ensure that some things are retained in the future because we retain control over our own destiny.
And so there's two big things you do. Like, one is scale, which is Europe basically lacks scale, whereas there's the subscale markets. We don't have EU Inc. working yet, or even at the scale we want it to be at. We don't yet have the Draghi report fully committed, and so on. So, is there a question of scale around just Europe not, frankly, being capturing the benefits of being still the largest consumer market in the world? Versus is it a mental more problem, which is basically leadership has not yet grasped an image of what the challenges is and sort of articulated a story in terms of probable pain for our citizens, but something that takes us on the journey there. Are those two separate issues, or do you think they're the same?
No, well, they're both very relevant issues, and they're of course linked. What we always talk about this European market and the internal market. I keep telling people, if someone puts in their strategy, we're exploiting the full potential of the European internal market, then he or she is a liar. We know that there is no internal market, even though there is an aspiration. But the whole system is built for addressing problems that arise in the market ex post. So if we want an internal market, then we have to have ex ante regulation, and where Europe sets the norms. We don't want that. We have to be frank. Our electorates and our national governments don't want Europe to determine what our future should look like, and how we should consume, how we should pay pensions, and those kind of things. And that is an internal market. Is that there is this kind of a singularity of norms and regulations that companies or entities that want to operate across borders can do so freely. We don't want that. We want the idea, but we don't, and we will not have it. We will be able, maybe through EU Inc. and other ways, to allow certain entities that we find important we could allow to reduce, or we may be able to reduce some of their regulatory burden and make it easier to operate across Europe. We may eventually come to this capital, what we call the Saving and Investments Union. I mean, that will have capital flowing more freely across the 27 jurisdictions. So we may be dealing with elements of the single market, but we'll never come to a single market if we just continue the way we do now.
So this fragmentation cuts across multiple levels, right? So regulatory, legal, capital, markets, clients, talent, right? All over the place. So an entrepreneur sitting in the Netherlands or in any European country for that has already from the get-go a disadvantage in a sense because of this fragmentation at different levels. What can the entrepreneur do to scale fast, given this fragmentation across all those different levels, including business and talent and clients, right? Which is an issue.
Well, yeah, it depends very much on the market. Sorry, one moment. Sorry, I had some background noise and need to. Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yes, I'm talking about from the point of view the fragmentation. Fragmentation is at different levels, including clients level, market, go to market, talent level, financing, legal, many levels. So what's the best way for startup entrepreneurs to navigate this, and how can we support them best? How do you support them in Techleap best to go at scale across Europe easier?
Yeah, so I mean, entrepreneurs are remarkable creatures who don't stop when they meet resistance. So we've seen large companies emerge from Europe as well, even though it's much harder than if you are in a more integrated market like let's say the US or India or others. But we sometimes forget that US is also not as integrated as we sometimes think. But as long as they think global from the start, and of course we had a lot of companies in the SaaS space and fintechs, and those maybe are easier to export. In the past, in biotech, or especially health and medtech, we would say, experiment in Europe and then expand in the US. And as long as that's possible, that's probably still the right menu for them. As long as FDA approval is kind of easier than EMA approval, and then you have a larger market to go to. But it's harder, of course, for those European companies than their US counterparts. But that hardship also hardens them. It allows them. They have more experience how to operate in multiple markets than their US counterparts. So it's also that hardship is not always bad, but it's definitely slows them down. Now in AI, I think you see that these companies that like Lovable and 11 Labs and those are actually also capable to scale quite rapidly in Europe and globally, or at least in more, let's say, more in the Western Hemisphere. And they think global from day one. So there are more barriers than they would experience, and often they'd be Delaware Incs. as well. So they are European companies, but they still register as a Delaware company, and very likely they will exit at Nasdaq. So these companies will make it. It's still Europe will not benefit from those companies in the same way that the US would, if those companies would have been, if it would emerge from the US.
So if you play this for 10, 15 years or 20 years, we end up in a sort of happy place. What needs to have happened now or in the next couple of years for us to be in a happy place? What's the positive scenario you could imagine?
Well, a positive scenario, I think, is indeed that we need that capital union, and so we'll have more companies being able to attract European money. I think there's a lot of money in Europe that is currently underutilized. We have a lot of pension fund money which is invested outside of Europe. So if that money can actually stay in Europe, be invested in European companies that grow, and we created more of a flywheel within Europe, then I don't see why we would why we don't have a kind of a very could even have an optimistic future. I mean, we sometimes forget that we have among the best scientists, we have incredible universities, and we still have, and this is really crucial, we have the continent now that has the rule of law, that has independence of its academia, and as long as we hold on to those values, the talent of the world will want to come here. But we have to accommodate that talent of the world to do positive things and to contribute. And we have to really be very careful that we are not turning into xenophobic continent, because that would also cut us off of that talent. And I think if I look around, and I was at the conference last week, Hello Tomorrow in Amsterdam, which is all around deep tech, then you see that there is a lot of energy there, and it just needs the fuel, and it needs also the support and the alignment of politics and business and those entrepreneurship and capital to allow for really, really cool companies to emerge from Europe and be very successful. And we're seeing this now in the quantum space. Like one company after the other in Europe is raising 100 million, 200 million, 300, 400 million. And even though the US has been ahead with their, sometimes billions, and these companies are really solid companies. They're very solid technology, and they just need to get the push to be able to compete at that global level. Actually, I was in London 2 weeks ago, or I don't know if it was last week. No, it was always time goes quickly. And someone said it was running an incredible semicon company. Said sometimes we in the UK, but I think it's something that goes for Europe. We need permission to think big and to act fast, and sometimes maybe that. And actually, I think that's true. We in Europe tend to want to first ask permission to be able to win, and I think that's something that our politicians and governments can do. You can actually give entrepreneurs permission to go fast, and we tempt them to want to hold them back. We say they are the outliers, and they have policies that we don't maybe agree with because they have a different kind of mindset, and I think embracing those people, being proud of the successes that come out of Europe, like Bollerton has done this recent campaign, Built in Europe. I think those things help. There's a lot about rhetoric. I think we have, and the first half of this interview was also about trying to identify the problems. I think in Europe we do tend to specialize in identifying the problem, and then an American wouldn't do that. You focus on on growth and your successes. America, if you ask them like, so what's the success of America, then they wouldn't start saying our infrastructure is crap and our education is unpayable, our healthcare system is broke. I mean, and we in Europe would never start saying, well, we actually have an amazing society. We have an incredible culture. We have freedom of speech. We can be proud of our rule of law and democratic values. And yes, we also need to kind of get this engine, this innovation engine and the industrialization engine back up to speed. But we have a basis to work from that a lot of other entities in the world, geographies in the world do not have. And we should be a bit more proud of that and build from that strength.
One quick question, Constantijn, and I love what you are saying, of course. I see here lots of hearts and yeses. Quick question. You mentioned quantum. You mentioned also other kind of more researchy, IP-based. You mentioned talent. And you also earlier mentioned about universities, what you do in Techleap, right? So how you support commercialization from universities. Anything to share there? Because lots of the innovations now are really heavy research-based, right? We are living in deep tech. How can we strengthen this transition from universities to commercialization and scale eventually? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah. So it's not as linear as it sounds. Of course, if you want to do the real deep tech, which has fundamental scientific roots, then there is a certain linearity to it. But that's more in the early stages. Then if you want to scale up a technology and you want to make it ready for industrialization, you need a whole ecosystem around it, of suppliers, we often see these companies that have a technology in there and they are really proud and they proof of concept and all that. But then to take it from there to an industrial scale requires many more inventions and IP in terms of process developments to build a factory. If you just like a machine like ASML, isn't only about the incredible science that's happening in the machine, but you have to think about how you package it, how you transport it, how you install it. All of those things are innovations in themselves. They require different materials. They require new design principles and all that. And that's not the company itself. That's the whole ecosystem around. It's the 2,000 suppliers to ASML, and I think that's absolutely key. It was also when I was in Shenzhen, which was also so apparent. They can take any technology that's developed anywhere in the world, bring it there, rip it apart, and then looking at standardizing it and then rebuilding it and scaling it. And that is because they have that incredible manufacturing capability, and they think about how do we automate the hell out of this thing. And it's what I found really revealing is that China has it could have run their the low wage technology cycle, but they didn't before they before they went like in the milking phase. They already invested in automation. And of course, they have an incredible demographic challenge. By the end of the century, they'll have about 800 million people, down from 1.5 billion. And those people have to be replaced by probably by robotics and by technology. But they didn't wait for that to happen. They actually started investing in that. And we have the same demographics challenge ahead. We also, if we want to be competitive, we also need that kind of manufacturing capabilities. And if we don't start to develop that, so it's not just the science, it's how do you get the science out in the market as rapidly as possible. And that means that that whole ecosystem has to work together to build those products, to automate them, to bring them to market. And that you can only do in clusters. So I would really hope that we see clusters around. Of course, we've got London, Cambridge, Oxford. You have in France, you have the same around Grenoble. In the Netherlands, you have Netherlands and Belgium. You have around Semicon with IMEC and ASML in Eindhoven and in Leuven. And also in Germany, of course, around Munich. So, but these are too small still. We need to get more density in those ecosystems to be able to also jump on new technology waves. And I think that's going to be our challenge. Not so much just the linear commercialization of science.
Even connect them, or even connect those ecosystems across Europe. You mentioned a bunch of them. They still need to be kind of local, right? So, in some sense.
Yeah, connecting is of course great, but what does a connection mean? Is if that's like a political statement or a letter of intent or an MOU, that doesn't work. It has to be real collaboration corridors. I mean, like ASML works a lot with Zeiss and Trumpf and some of the other strong German, really excellent German companies. And once those relationships exist, of course, you can build around that, and it shouldn't be just single company, but you can actually grow that to a wider ecosystem of suppliers.
So I mean, I think your point about showing the opportunity here and seeing as a positive thing is very true, especially like Asia, where they're aware they have a glooming demographic crisis, and this for them is a solution, whereas in the West, we're just worrying about jobs at the moment, which is a very different perspective of the same issue. So just like take a step back before we go to Q&A, and please, people, do add questions to the mix, and we'll try and bring them forward. You know, your family firm, as it were, has been running probably one of the most successful parts of the planet for half a millennia now. So I wonder, when you talk to startup founders who've been, going at it for 5 weeks or 5 months or a couple of years, what's your sort of advice to them? What sort of perspective do you bring to the conversation when you give them advice on how to take these things forward and build, hopefully, multi-generational firms?
I don't think I would like to kind of draw on our history as an inspiration for future companies, actually. But actually, we weren't. I mean, we always had. This is the interesting thing in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is actually a republic, and has been a republic, and in its heydays was a republic, which we've had a family member of ours mostly at the helm of the military side. But in terms of its success, it's been led by commerce and much less so by the family firm, if you what you refer to. I think what is maybe, if there is a lesson, and it's more towards governance, it's about how you can facilitate that and not try to lead everything, but actually create an opportunity and framework conditions for others to be successul. And it's the entrepreneurs that need to drive the change. And so I don't advise them at all from my background. I advise them by bringing them in a room with other founders that have done what they're trying to do, and that have to learn from their mistakes and to give each other tips. I think it really is about community and sharing within dense communities of founders, of investors, of corporates as well, to bring the experience that is there to bear to these companies instead of locking them up. I think one of the things we're seeing in Europe, which is that there's very little corporate venturing. So we see what US does really well, and some countries in Asia as well, is that the large corporates are actually engaging very, very much with the startups. So they are producing startups, they're spinning them out, they're spinning them in, they're acquiring them. They have elaborate programs, corporate venturing programs, where they invest, where they create. And I think that's a real pity. We don't see that enough, because the startups can benefit a lot from the operational excellence that is in these companies. They often have very interesting data as well that they can process. The large companies benefit a lot from the agility and the mindset and the velocity of these startup companies. We would wish for the large European companies to be much more open to startups and making this engagement with startups a part of their innovation strategy, instead of basically either outsourcing it to universities or just building large in-house teams.
This is amazing because it relates to the industrial AI and what we started with, which is the next round of AI, which is world models, industrial know-how, industrial data, which is exactly a place where Europe has a strength. So strengthening this part we just said, corporate VC, or how the role of industry would be, sounds indeed great. How do we do this? What do we say to the audience, which, as you know, largely INSEAD alumni in those executive roles in the industry, but also the governments, to strengthen this role of industry in this game, the critical role?
I repeat the message. I mean, it's up to the industry themselves. And if they don't see what we see, that when we see Europe having the same companies that we had 50, 60 years ago, and still being the ones that are doing most in R&D, we don't see the companies like in the US that have come up in a very brief time. And we're seeing a bit of that now, but that's 40 years. There's a 40 years gap where we haven't really produced those companies. If they don't see that, and if they don't see that there's a massive challenge ahead, then it's hard to tell it. I mean, it's the pain, I think, and will bring the urgency if these companies are facing problems. We knew about the importance of electrification, of mobility, more than, it's like 15 years ago, and there was a deliberate choice to ignore that technology for all the maybe good reasons. But in the meantime, China was electrification now with mobility. They're investing a lot in that whole in the demand side and supplies of energies. And now, where Europe was in a leading position when it comes to norm setting and all that, creating a market that was driven by regulations. In renewables, etc. We are now find that we're also there. We're falling behind because we didn't stick to our views, and we didn't really develop the market. And so it's partly policymakers. I mean, policymakers should create markets and create opportunities for these companies to actually really exploit the underlying technology and societal trends. On the other hand, it's really with the companies, and if they don't make those adjustments, they will feel the consequences. And it's great companies that acknowledge time in a timely fashion, that the times are changing, and they pivot. And maybe governments can help them, give them a bit of time to pivot, but they need to do it. And if they don't, then our companies will be in a very bad state.
Let's take some questions from the audience. There are many questions here, so I'll just throw two out there, and one at a time you can answer, of course. But one question is, what's your opinion on the recent Digital Sovereignty Act? And there's another question, you take whatever order you like. Today, do you think there should be public incentives, similar to the recently announced Scale Up Europe Fund, for the private market to build an EU-sized digital marketplace for innovations? The role of public incentives for marketplaces for innovations. I don't know, take either question you like in whatever order.
Yeah, I don't know the actual details of the Sovereignty Act. I think we mentioned before, sovereignty is a difficult concept, but I think we do we should not be as naive as we were. So we need to understand what we lack in capabilities, where our vulnerabilities are, and how do we address those. And you can address those in different ways. Through one, optionality. You can address them by building your own capabilities, and you can address them by creating leverage so that you ensure that others will still continue to provide you with those materials and services, etc. So there are different strategies there, and I don't actually know the details if the right balance is struck between those strategies, and also about how we want to play with our, you know, closing or opening our markets to certain sectors, and how that will play out. So I just simply don't know. What the other question was about,
Public incentives.
digital, yeah, public incentives. So the Scale Up Fund is an interesting one because it's structured as a private fund. It's initiated by the European Commission and seeded by the Commission, or anchored by the Commission, and then invites private capital to also invest in these opportunities. So as long as it's run in a professional way, I think it can be good. I think if we can have more incentives for pension funds to invest in this space, maybe in some ways de-risk it a bit, so that they have also because they have the interest of their pensioners at, you know, that's their first interest. So we can't ask from these pension funds to spend large amounts of capital in a very risky space if that is goes to the detriment of their you know, their solvability. So I don't. But if the government can actually underwrite some of those investments through guarantees, if at all, then more money could go into this space, and they would and the pensioners would still be guaranteed a return. There are structures that are possible. The Danes have done that, and I think in Belgium they have also similar structures. So things can be done, and I think what the UK has done in the past, and Sweden through fiscal means to make it more attractive for people to invest in startups. And to be able to kind of postpone taxing if you have a successful exit, and you can reinvest. So you have the reinvestment incentives. Those all work. So we know that there are quite a lot of public incentive schemes that can work really, really well. And so let's use them and let's apply them across the continent.
Can I pick up on that? Because I think a lot of the pension funds actually are investing in quite risky US equities. I mean, they're all piling into the SpaceX SpaceX IPO. They're pouring money into US funds in one way or another.
SpaceX risky? Come on, Tim.
Is the issue here that we've got a European funds just not willing to sort of, I've got a middleman problem effectively, where people put their money through the US to invest in the space rather than keeping the money at home to invest in Europe? Is that the problem, or is it we just don't have the capital?
No, I think there are a few things. It's the US market is also more mature in sense of advisors and people that understand the risk, and so you can invest in a company like a fund like Sequoia is really large, so they take big bets, but they understand risk quite well, so they do big bets maybe in the early stage and double down on the really successful investments, and therefore mitigate their risk in a way that the European funds can't because they are too small. So there's a point there. And the second thing I think is the reputational risk. So our funds at least like the private equity investment to be done not on the continent, but from either Hong Kong or New York, because you know, they're very high fees. Our taxpayers don't like that, and they don't look at the returns. They mostly just look at the cost, and they think it's ridiculous that these private equity fund managers get super wealthy over pension fund money, and they also made you super wealthy, but that's sometimes just from a communication perspective, it's seen as risky, and these funds are often run by people that have a more political affiliation, or they are of course they've got their, you know, their pensioners and, you know, in as their constituency. So venture capital and private equity don't kind of mix very well with that environment, and so there are those. I mean, all of those small kind of those reasons there are. And, you know, if you have that, you might not invest in the capabilities because it's a very specific skill set. If you're understanding venture capital, and then they were complaining about not being able to deploy enough capital in these funds because the funds were relatively small. And if you do a minimal capital allocation of 50 million, then, you know, you don't want to be at 25% of a venture capital firm. So you have to find firms that are at least, you know, 500 million or a billion, and there are not that many in Europe. So there are all kinds of structural reasons why this happened, but I think that's changing, and therefore the Scale Up Fund is also interesting because it provides a a 3 to 4 billion vehicle for those funds to deploy capital in, and we're seeing quite a number of larger funds emerging in Europe. So that problem will be eventually be solved as well.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you, Constantijn, for ending on a note of some hope after what has been a clear call to action and a clarion message to us all about the challenges we face. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Constantijn.
Pleasure.
Excellent.